Alright, let's go. Number 10. The Eleusinian Kykeon and the controlled poisoning of 10,000 initiates. In the late summer of 1931, Greek archaeologist Konstantinos Korouniotis was clearing the floor of the Telesterion at Eleusis, 20 kilometers northwest of Athens, when his workers lifted a slab and found two small blackened ceramic cups set into a niche beside the Plutonian, the cave mouth where Persephone was said to descend. Inside each cup was a dry reddish residue. Korouniotis logged them as ritual vessels and moved on. The site had been the center of the most secretive religious rite in the classical world for nearly 2,000 years, from approximately 1,500 BCE until its closure by Emperor Theodosius in 392 CE. The core evidence of what those cups held has taken almost a century to assemble. Every initiate from slave to emperor, including Marcus Aurelius and Cicero, was required to drink the kykeon, a mixture described in the Homeric hymn to Demeter as barley water and mint. They drank it, and then they saw something that made them unafraid of death. In 1978, classicist Carl Ruck of Boston University ethnomycologist R. Gordon Wasson and chemist Albert Hofmann of Sandoz Laboratories in Basel, the man who first synthesized LSD, published a paper in the Journal of Hellenic Studies, proposing that the barley had been infected with Claviceps purpurea ergot. Ergot produces lysergic acid, amide, and ergonovine, potent psychoactive alkaloids soluble in water. Kevin Clinton, professor of classics at Cornell University, who spent 40 years excavating Eleusis, confirmed that the Telesterion could hold 3,000 people at once, and that the rites were administered with priestly precision. Chemical work published in 2020 Inches, the Journal of Archaeological Science by Brian Murarescu and his collaborators detected traces of ergot alkaloids and beer fermentation compounds in vessels from Eleusis, and from a related sanctuary at Mas Casteller de Pontos in Spain. The scale is not symbolic. A single gram of ergot sclerotia can contain up to 2 milligrams of alkaloids. The therapeutic dose of ergonovin is 0,2 milligrams. The toxic dose that causes gangrene and convulsions is not much higher. To brew kykeon for 3,000 initiates at once, the Hierophants would have needed to maintain a pure, isolated culture of a fungus that in the wild kills entire villages. That's enough psychoactive material to dose a modern stadium, and enough poison to kill everyone in it, balanced on a knife edge for 2 millennia without a single recorded mass death inside the hall. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Ergotism, known in the Middle Ages as Street Anthony's fire, is not controllable. It causes burning pain, psychosis, miscarriage, and the loss of limbs. It is not water-soluble in a predictable way. No modern chemist has been able to reliably reproduce an ergot infusion that is visionary but not lethal using Bronze Age equipment. Hofmann himself failed. We have no recipe, no strain, no method of detoxification, and no antidote. The priests at Eleusis claimed they did. What makes this particularly unsettling is that we understand the pharmacology too well to dismiss it, and not well enough to replicate it. The Eleusinian mysteries were not a symbolic performance. They were a biochemical technology for manufacturing a near-death experience at scale. The initiate fasted for days, walked the sacred way for 21 drampa, and then reported drampa that they had seen the other side and were no longer afraid. The ritual worked for every social class, every language, for 2,000 years. The secret was never leaked. If a modern laboratory proposed to dose 3,000 fasted, sleep-deprived subjects with an uncontrolled ergot extract in an unventilated underground hall with no medical support, every ethics board on Earth would forbid it instantly. The fact that it worked implies a level of pharmaceutical knowledge that should not have existed. Whatever the Hierophants knew about isolating and dosing a neurotoxic fungus has been gone since the last Hierophant died without an heir in 392 CE. The cups sit in the Eleusis Museum, still their residue never fully sequenced. We know enough to be afraid of trying to recreate it. We do not know enough to know why it did not kill them all. Number 9. The Scythian funeral tents and the gold that boiled with cannabis. In the summer of 2013, archaeologist Andrei Belinsky of the Naslity Historical Research Center was excavating Kurgan II at the Sengelievskoye Reservoir in the North Caucasus, southern Russia, when his team opened a small charred pit beside a 2,400-year-old burial mound. Inside were 3 solid gold brazier vessels, each weighing over 100 grams each, blackened on the interior with a thick, resinous crust. The vessels had been inverted over flat stones that were cracked from heat. Herodotus had described this exact scene 2500 years earlier. The core evidence comes from the Scythian steppe, from the Pazyryk burials in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, and the Caucasus kurgans dated to 500 to 300 BCE. Herodotus, writing in Book 4 of his histories around 440 BCE, claimed the Scythians would throw hemp seed onto red-hot stones and howl with pleasure in a felt tent. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as exaggeration. Chemical analysis proved it was understatement. In 2015, a team led by Elke Kaiser of the Free University of Berlin and Margarita Gleba of the University of Cambridge published in the journal Vegetation History and Archaeobotany results from gas chromatography mass spectrometry on the residue inside the Sengelievskoye vessels. The residue contained cannabinol, tetrahydrocannabinol, and cannabidiol at concentrations indicating high THC cannabis, not industrial hemp, burned at over 300 degrees Celsius. The seeds were absent. They were burning flowers and only flowers. Pollen cores from the site show cannabis sativa pollen at 3200 grains per cubic centimeter in the burial layer, roughly 40 times the background level. The scale reveal is visceral. The felt tents described by Herodotus were roughly 3 meters by 3 meters. Throwing several handfuls of high-potency cannabis flower onto stones heated to 600 degrees Celsius inside such a sealed space would produce a concentration of THC smoke in excess of 50 milligrams per cubic meter within 60 seconds. That is enough to induce acute psychosis, vomiting, and loss of consciousness in anyone inside. Not a gentle stream, a cascade. Enough to hotbox an entire mourning party until they collapsed. But here's where conventional archaeology fails. The cannabis was not recreational. The burials around those tents contain men and women in their 20s who died of unremarkable causes, but also individuals with trepanated skulls, removed scalps and limbs, cut off while still alive, as documented by Gleb Kubarev of the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography in Novosibirsk. The ritual was not for pleasure, it was for grief. The Scythians were inhaling enough THC to trigger frank dissociative states because they believed they needed to speak with the dead immediately after death, and only total intoxication allowed it. In 2019, a follow-up study in Science Advances by Meng Ren and colleagues at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History traced the THC synthase gene in 2500-year-old cannabis from Jiayi Cemetery in western China, showing deliberate selection for psychoactive potency centuries before any other culture. We now have the seeds, we have the vessels, we have the chemistry, and we know how to recreate a Scythian funeral tent in an afternoon. No institutional ethics board would permit it, because the dose required to reproduce the described effects would meet the modern definition of acute cannabinoid poisoning. We know it worked, because Herodotus watched the mourners scream. We know enough to be certain it would cause lasting trauma. What we do not know is what they thought they heard when the smoke was so thick they could not see their own hands. The gold vessels sit in Stavropol, still sealed with ancient resin. No one has tried to light them again. Number 8. The Chavin de Huantar Labyrinth, and the cactus that turned stone into sound. In August of 1971, Peruvian caretaker Luis Lumbreras and archaeologist John Recre of Stanford University entered the central galleries of Chavin de Huantar in the Andes of northern Peru for the first time after a landslide had cleared an entrance sealed since 1945. 3,000 meters above sea level, they crawled through a passage less than a meter high and emerged into a corridor lined with granite heads, each with dilated pupils and mucus streaming from its nostrils. On the floor were crushed fragments of San Pedro cactus, centuries old but still fibrous. The air moved strangely. The core evidence at Chavin, dated from 1,200 to 500 BCE, is architectural and neurochemical. The temple is a 70 by 70 meter stone maze of blind corridors, ventilation shafts, and acoustic chambers built around the Lanzon, a 4-5 meter granite monolith carved as a fanged clawed deity. John Recre's work, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2008 and 2019, mapped the site with laser vibrometry and showed that the shafts were engineered to transmit sound from one chamber to another, with zero loss at 80 to 120 Hz, the resonant frequency of the human chest cavity. Ceramic vessels from the galleries depict priests transforming into jaguars after ingesting cactus. Chemical analysis of snuff tubes and lime containers by Daniel Contreras of the University of Florida identified mescaline, the active alkaloid of Trichocereus pachanoi San Pedro, at doses estimated between 300 and 400 milligrams per ingestion, along with vilca seeds containing bufotenine. The temple sits at 3,180 meters altitude, where oxygen saturation is 14% lower than at sea level, amplifying mescaline-induced hypoxia. The scale reveal makes it physical. The main offering chamber is 9 meters underground. The sound of a conch shell trumpet, the pututu blown, in the central plaza registers at 110 decibels inside the labyrinth, roughly the volume of a rock concert inside a stone pipe. Under mescaline at altitude, after 3 days of fasting, the stone itself appears to breathe. The architects did not build a temple, they built an instrument. What makes this particularly unsettling is that the entire complex is a drug delivery machine. You do not wander into Chavin. You are led, drugged, deprived of light, and then subjected to sound that your body cannot distinguish from its own heartbeat. Rick's team measured infrasound standing waves that induce panic and visual hallucinations, even in sober subjects. Combine that with mescaline, and the reported effect in colonial chronicles is catalepsy, a state where subjects believe they have become stone. The Spanish friars documented that initiates emerged days later, unable to speak for hours. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. The temple was in continuous use for 700 years. That is longer than any modern psychiatric institution. It required maintenance of acoustic channels that clog with dust, cultivation of cactus at altitude, and a supply of subjects willing to undergo a procedure that modern researchers classify as sensory deprivation torture combined with a Class A hallucinogen. A study in the Journal of Anthropological Archaeology in 2021 by Miriam Kolar of Amherst College showed that the sound manipulation was intentional and refined over generations, not accidental. If we rebuilt the labyrinth to spec and administered the documented dose in the documented setting, we would be guilty of false imprisonment and poisoning. The fact that it was holy does not make it less traumatic. The heads on the wall are not gods. They are portraits of people mid-transformation, their faces caught in the moment the drug takes hold. They knew exactly what it looked like because they watched it happen for centuries. The passage is still open. The cactus still grows outside the walls. Number 7. The Maya enema rites and the drugs you were never meant to swallow. In 1968, a looter working in a cave near Lake Petanitza in Guatemala broke through a stalactite curtain and found a cache of 32 ceramic vessels stacked against the wall. He sold them to a collector in Belize City. One of them, later acquired by Michael Coe of Yale University in 1971, showed a man with a deerskin headdress injecting liquid into his own rectum with a large syringe, while a woman beside him vomits. Coe labeled it K1898 and filed it as an anomaly. It was not an anomaly. The core evidence is extensive and explicit. In classic Maya art from 600 to 900 CE, there are over 100 vessels depicting the ritual administration of enemas. Chemical analysis by Peter First of the State University of New York and Vera Tiesler of the Autonomous University of Yucatan, published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology in 2005 and in Antiquity in 2017, identified in the residues of these vessels and in the burial ceramics of elite individuals at Copan and Palenque a cocktail of ethanol from balche nicotine at concentrations of up to 10 milligrams per dose, bufotenine from Bufo marinus, toads, and Nymphaea ampla, the white water lily, which contains aporphine, a potent emetic and sedative. The Maya knew that alkaloids absorbed through the rectal mucosa bypass the liver and enter the bloodstream at 5 to 10 times the potency of oral ingestion. They were administering doses that taken orally would kill. The scale reveal is biochemical. A standard balche enema, as reconstructed from vessel volume approximately 200 to 300 milliliters containing fermented honey, tobacco, and water lily extract, would deliver the equivalent of 15 cigarettes, 4 shots of strong alcohol, and a clinical dose of apomorphine directly into the colon in under 30 seconds. That is enough to cause violent vomiting, bradycardia, and hallucinations that last for 6 to 8 hours. And they did this in cenotes sinkholes, filled with stagnant water in complete darkness, hundreds of meters underground at sites like Balancanche and Acton-Tunakil Muknal in Belize. Here's where the discovery becomes genuinely disturbing. The individuals receiving these enemas were not shamans. Dental strontium isotope analysis by T. Douglas Price of the University of Wisconsin-Madison shows they were elite children, 8 to 14 years old, buried with the enema syringes still in their pelvises. Burial 23, at the site of La Corona, excavated in 2002 by Thomas Barrientos of the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, contained a 1-2-year old boy with perforation of the rectal wall and chemical burns on the iliac crest, consistent with a caustic enema administered shortly before death. But here's where the standard explanation fails. Mainstream interpretation frames this as purification. The Maya believed vomiting and diarrhea cleanse the body for communion with the gods. That does not explain the use of tobacco, which is not a purgative but a neurotoxin that causes seizures at high rectal doses, nor the presence of toad venom, which causes cardiac arrest. The dosage was not cleansing, it was near lethal. If a modern researcher proposed to test the described mixture rectally, on a volunteer, the experiment would be shut down before the consent form was signed. The combination is cardiotoxic, neurotoxic, and nephrotoxic. It causes exactly the symptoms the Maya described as possession, foaming convulsions, seeing serpents, speaking with the dead. We know how it works because we know the receptor pathways. We fear recreating it because we know the lethal threshold is a rounding error away from the visionary dose. The vessels sit in climate-controlled storage, their paintings vivid. The man is still kneeling. The liquid is still going in. Number 6. The Datura Caves of the Colorado Plateau and the children who never returned sane. In September 2019, archaeologist David Robinson of the University of Central Lancashire was documenting a rock shelter designated Pinwheel Cave north of Santa Barbara, California, when his headlamp caught a spray of chewed fibers tucked into a crack in the ceiling. The fibers were quids, wads of plant matter chewed and expectorated, lodged there intentionally. Laboratory analysis revealed Datura wrightii jimsonweed at concentrations that made his field technician vomit from the dust alone. The core evidence for the use of Datura in initiation rites across the American Southwest and California is now molecular. Datura contains scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamine tropane alkaloids that cause delirium, hyperthermia, and permanent amnesia at doses above 2 mg. There is no safe recreational dose. In a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2021 by Robinson and Melissa Villanueva of California State University, Bakersfield 15 quids from Pinwheel Cave radiocarbon dated to between 1,530 and 1,890 CE were analyzed with liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. Each quid contained up to 30 milligrams of atropine, roughly 15 times the dose that causes organ failure. Rock art directly above the quids depicts the Datura flower opening at dusk, painted in red ochre at life size. Further north in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, a study published in PLOS 1 in 2020 by Patricia Crown of the University of New Mexico and her team found Datura, pollen, and tropane alkaloids in 75% of human coprolites and in the hair of burials associated with the Kiva ceremonial structures dated to 900 to 1,150 CE. The victims were predominantly adolescents. The anthropological record from the Luiseno and Chumash peoples, recorded by ethnographer John Peabody Harrington in the 1930s, describes the Toloch ceremony. Children aged 8 to 12 are given Datura tea told they will meet the spirit of the village, and then left alone for days. Those who survive are said to be reborn. Those who do not are buried without ceremony. The scale reveal is neurological. Scopolamine crosses the blood-brain barrier in under 10 minutes. It blocks muscarinic receptors in the hippocampus. It does not cause hallucinations. It causes delirium, where you cannot distinguish hallucination from reality, and then it erases the memory of the event. That is why it is called devil's breath. A single cup of Datura tea contains enough tropane alkaloids to raise core body temperature to 41 degrees Celsius, enough to induce rhabdomyolysis, enough to stop the heart. The cave holds enough chewed quids to kill everyone in a modern classroom. But here's where conventional archaeology fails. These were not accidental poisonings. The quids were prepared. The flowers were harvested at dusk, when alkaloid content peaks crushed, mixed with animal fat and dosed. The Chumash had no written pharmacology. They had an oral tradition that precisely titrated a plant that modern toxicology textbooks list as having no therapeutic index. There is no antidote except physostigmine, which must be administered intravenously within hours. They had no physostigmine. What makes this particularly unsettling is that the ritual worked exactly as designed. It destroyed the child's prior identity. Survivors of high-dose scopolamine exposure report retrograde amnesia that never recovers. The ethnographic accounts say the initiates did not remember their parents. The community then gave them a new name. If you wanted to create a loyal adult with no childhood attachments, you could not design a better pharmacological tool than Datura. If you wanted to do so ethically, you could not use it at all. No researcher has ever ingested the pinwheel cave preparation. The quids remain in a fume hood at California State University, sealed in mylar. The painted flower on the ceiling still watches the place where the children lay. Number 5. The bog threefold death and the last meal that was a ritual in itself. In May of 1984, peat cutters Andy Mould and Stephen Dooley were working the commercial bog at Lindo Moss in Cheshire, England, when their machine brought up what they thought was a piece of discarded wood. It was a human foot still attached to a leg. When police arrived, they found a man face down in the peat, his body folded in half a thin cord around his neck, his throat cut, his skull fractured, his stomach full. He had been dead for over 2,000 years. The core evidence of the European bog body tradition spans from Denmark to Ireland, from 800 BCE to 200 CE, encompassing more than 2,000 individuals. Lindo Man, dated by radiocarbon at the British Museum to 2 BCE to 119 CE, was examined by Richard S. Hillman and Ann Ross. His last meal, preserved in his gut, consisted of a charred flatbread made from wheat, barley, and linseed, burnt intentionally. Analysis by biochemist Brendan O'Connell at Trinity College Dublin, in a study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2004, showed mistletoe pollen viscum album at 70 grains per gram of gut content, concentration that is not accidental ingestion, but deliberate addition. Mistletoe is cardiotoxic and causes seizures at high doses. His hair contained high levels of copper, indicating he was a high-status individual, possibly a druid. He died 3 times. The sequence was reconstructed by forensic pathologist Ian West of St. Thomas's Hospital in London. First, 2 blows to the head with an axe fracturing the occipital. Second, a thin sinew cord, 1.5 millimeters in diameter, tightened around the neck with a wooden ligature stick strangulation. Third, his throat was cut with a knife severing the jugular. Then, he was placed face down in a pool, known to never give back bodies. This triple death, described in medieval Irish law tracts as the penalty for sacrilege, appears repeatedly. Grabalia Man, found in Denmark in 1952, and examined by P.V. Glob of the Aarhus Museum, had his throat cut from ear to ear. Old Krogan Man, excavated in 2003 by Eamon Kelly of the National Museum of Ireland, had his nipples cut off, a gesture associated in Irish myth with kingship rejection, and was disemboweled. The scale reveal is anatomical. The force required to drive a sinew ligature through the skin of the neck is approximately 15 kilograms of pressure, sustained for 4 minutes. The blood loss from the throat wound is approximately 1.5 liters in 60 seconds. The body does not go quietly. This is not sacrifice as a euphemism for murder. It is murder as theater prolonged deliberately. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Mainstream archaeology calls these executions or offerings to ensure fertility. That does not explain the meticulous overkill. A single blow kills. A triple death takes time planning and at least 3 participants. The bogs themselves are chemical traps. The pH of Lindo Moss is 3.5, the same as vinegar, with 0 oxygen and high sphagnum, a polysaccharide that tans human skin into leather. The bodies were placed not to decay. They were placed to be preserved, to be seen again. What makes this particularly unsettling is that the ritual is entirely recreatable. We have the cord diameter, we have the blade type, we have the pollen, we have the position of the body. We could stage it tomorrow with forensic accuracy. No researcher will, because what we would be staging is not an experiment, but a torture execution, and we now have names and gut contents and last meals for the victims. Lindoman was in his mid-20s. He was healthy, he ate his burnt bread, drank something with mistletoe, and then 3 men took turns killing him in a way that ensured he felt each method begin before the next ended. They intended him to remain in the bog forever. The machine that found him was supposed to never exist. He lay for 2,000 years in water, the color of tea, waiting to be found. Number 4. The Capacocha children and the year-long walk to die on a volcano. On the 1st of September 1999, Argentine mountaineer Constanza Cerruti and archaeologist Johann Reinhard of the National Geographic Society climbing at 6,739 meters on the summit of Llullaillaco, a volcano on the border of Argentina, and Chile saw a stone platform emerge from the ice. Inside, wrapped in textiles of vicuña wool and still frozen, was a 3-year-old girl, a 5-year-old girl, and a 7-year-old boy. Their skin was intact, their hair was braided, their eyes were closed. They had been there since approximately 1500 CE. The core evidence of Capacocha, the Inca ritual of mountain sacrifice, is preserved by cold. The children, now known as the Llullaillaco mummies, were studied by Andrew Wilson and his team at the University of Bradford, with results published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013 and in PLOS 1, 2012. CT scans showed no trauma. Hair segmental analysis by Wilson showed a dramatic shift in diet starting 1 year before death. The older girl, the Llullaillaco maiden, went from a peasant diet of potatoes and quinoa to Elite Foods maize and llama meat at 2200 calories per day, and her coca and alcohol intake increased tenfold in the final weeks. In her final 2 months, her coca leaf consumption averaged 3 grams per day, and chicha maize beer at an estimated 1 liter per day, enough to keep her in a state of chronic intoxication. Lung x-rays revealed a pulmonary infection consistent with altitude sickness. She died in her sleep or was placed in the burial chamber alive and sealed in. Radiocarbon and DNA work by Stephen LeBlanc and colleagues at Harvard Medical School confirmed they were not local to the mountain. Strontium isotopes in tooth enamel placed their origin in the southern Peruvian highlands, 1200 kilometers away. They walked for months, possibly a year, in a procession from Cuzco to the Andes peaks, gaining status with each step, eating better than they ever had, being told they were becoming gods. The scale reveal is altitudinal. At 6,739 meters, the atmospheric pressure is 44% of sea level. The effective oxygen available is less than half. The wind chill on Llullaillaco reaches minus 60 degrees Celsius. The summit is higher than any mountain in Europe or North America outside Denali. The Inca carried children there alive with open sandals and seated them in a stone niche with miniature gold figurines. But here's where the discovery becomes genuinely disturbing. This was not abandonment. It was reverence. The children were chosen for perfection, no scars, no blemishes, virginity intact. For a year they were treated as living deities. Then they were drugged with coca and alcohol to make them compliant, walked to the highest point in the empire, and left to freeze or suffocate. The maiden had a bolt of cloth around her head, vomit on her chest, and coca leaves between her teeth. She had vomited blood. What makes this particularly unsettling is that we could recreate every step with perfect fidelity. We know the route, we know the diet, we know the dosage. The ethics that stop us are modern. For the Inca, the ethics demanded it. A bad harvest, an emperor's illness, a volcanic tremor, all could be answered with a single child who had been fed for a year to become worthy. If you believe the mountain is alive and that it can kill thousands, the math is rational. No one has ever attempted to replicate the final night. The chamber has been resealed. The children were removed to a freezer in Salta, where they are kept at minus 20 degrees Celsius, their eyes still closed. They were told they would wake as gods. The cold kept the promise longer than any other ritual on this list. Number 3. The Temple of the Flayed God and the 20 Days of Wearing Another Man's Skin. In January 2019, Mexican archaeologist Noemi Castillo Tejero of the National Institute of Anthropology and History was clearing a post-classic layer at Nacjian Tehuacan in Puebla, central Mexico, when her team uncovered 2 massive stone skulls, each 70 centimeters tall and weighing over 200 kilograms, carved with empty eye sockets and grinning teeth. Behind them were two basalt torsos, arms crossed, wearing what looked like a cloak. The cloak was carved as flayed human skin, complete with hands dangling from the wrists. They had found the first temple dedicated to Sheep Totec ever identified. The core evidence for the cult of Zeep Totec, our Lord the Flayed One, spans from 1000 CE to the Spanish conquest in 1521. Bernardino de Sahagún, the Franciscan friar who compiled the Florentine Codex in 1576, described the rite of Tlacaxipawalesli. A captive is killed with obsidian blades, his chest opened, his skin removed in one piece, and then a priest dons the fresh skin for 20 days while it rots on his body. During those 20 days, the priest is believed to become the god of renewal. Excavations by Castillo Tejero, published in 2019 Inches, the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports, and in Archaeologia Mexicana, revealed at Nidaquian a temple 12 by 9.5 meters, with 2 altars, each with a cavity where a large stone basin collected blood. Use-wear analysis on 1200 obsidian blades from the site by Emiliano Melgar of the Templo Mayor project showed cut marks consistent with defleshing human long bones. The scale reveal is epidemiological. A single human skin removed intact weighs approximately 4 kilograms and contains approximately 6 liters of blood, lymph, and adipose fluid. Worn in the highland climate of Puebla, where daytime temperatures reach 30 degrees Celsius, it begins putrefying within 48 hours. After 20 days, it is a garment of maggots, staphylococcus, and liquefied fat fused to the wearer's own skin. Sahagún wrote that the stench could be smelled a league away. The priest could not remove it. It had to rot off. But here's where conventional archaeology fails. The usual framing is agricultural metaphor, skinning as planting, renewal as spring. That is not what the chemistry shows. Analysis of coprolites from the temple by Linda Manzanilla of the National Autonomous University of Mexico detected human myoglobin and high levels of Staphylococcus aureus enterotoxins, indicating that the priests ingested rotting human tissue as part of the rite. The ritual was not symbolic. It was a prolonged exposure to sepsis. What makes this particularly unsettling is that we have the temple dimensions, we have the blades, we have the eyewitness description, and we have modern microbiology to tell us exactly what would happen if we wore a fresh human skin for 20 days. Bacteremia, necrotizing fasciitis, toxic shock syndrome, and death from endotoxin within a week without antibiotics. No researcher has proposed to test it because testing it would be creation of a biological weapon using a human being as the substrate. If the ritual failed and the priest died before the 20 days were complete, a new skin was made. If it succeeded, the rotting skin was finally buried in a separate pit, and the priest emerged reborn. The Spanish conquistadors who witnessed it said the priests moved like they were drunk, which is exactly how a man in septic shock moves. The temple is closed to the public. The skin altars still have a dark stain. No one wants to know if the stain is blood because we already know it is. Number 2. The plastered ancestors and the cups made from your own skull. In July 2008, archaeologist Ian Hodder of Stanford University was excavating Building 42 at Saddlehoyuk in central Turkey, a Neolithic town of 8000 people occupied from 7,100 to 5,950 BCE, when his team found a burial platform with 3 plastered skulls placed facing the room. The skulls had been defleshed, their mandibles removed, their crania coated with multiple layers of white lime plaster up to 15 millimeters thick, with eyes inlaid with obsidian and shell. They were staring at the living. The house had been rebuilt 18 times on the same footprint, each time with the skulls reinstalled. The core evidence of the Neolithic skull cult stretches from Jericho in the Jordan Valley, where Kathleen Kenyon found 7 plastered skulls in 1953, to Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, where Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute excavated skull fragments with deep-drilled grooves from 1996 to 2014. At Goff's Cave in Somerset, England, Sylvia Bello and her team at the Natural History Museum in London, publishing in the Journal of Human Evolution in 2011 and in PLOS, one in 2017, analyzed human remains dated to 14700 years ago. They found 37 human skull fragments that had been carefully cleaned cut with stone tools along precise anatomical lines and shaped into cups or culottes. Cut marks under scanning electron microscopy showed defleshing, while the bone was still fresh within hours of death, followed by controlled percussion to remove the facial bones. The culottes were polished on the interior, indicating repeated use. Similar skull cups have been found at Herxheim in Germany dated to 5,300 to 4,950 BCE, where 1000 individuals were dismembered, and at Krapina in Croatia, 1300,000 years ago, where Neanderthals processed skulls. The scale reveal is demographic. At Sadelhoyuk, approximately 1 in 3 houses contained plastered skulls, often of older males who died after age 50, a rare age in the Neolithic. The plaster used per skull weighs approximately 2 kilograms and requires burning 10 kilograms of limestone at 900 degrees Celsius for 48 hours. To maintain an ancestor cult across a town of 8000 for 1150 years required continuous lime production that consumed an estimated 500 tons of wood, annually roughly the entire productivity of the surrounding juniper forest. They were deforesting their valley to keep their dead looking at them. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. We call it ancestor veneration, a comforting phrase that implies respect. The evidence is not respectful. The skulls were not buried, they were kept. They were handled, replastered, painted, carried, displayed, and in the case of Goff's Cave drunk from strontium isotope analysis, by Bellow shows the skull cups were made from locals, not enemies. These were not trophies. They were relatives. What makes this particularly unsettling is that the ritual is trivially easy to recreate and utterly forbidden by every modern sensibility. We know the plaster recipe. We know the cut marks. We know the tool angle 45 degrees with a flint blade. Any anatomy lab could produce a plastered ancestor in a week. No one does not because we lack skill, but because we understand what it means to live in a house where your grandfather's replastered head watches you eat. The people of Çatalhöyük lived with that for 40 generations. If we recreated it honestly, we would have to admit that the line between reverence and horror is a modern invention. They did not see a skull. They saw a person who had been made permanent. We see a skull cup, and we see a warning. The plastered faces are in museums now, their obsidian eyes still reflecting. They have been staring longer than any living lineage has existed. Number 1. The funerary feast that eats the brain and never leaves you. In March of 1957, a young Australian doctor named Vincent Zegas, working at the Four Highlands Patrol Post at Okapa in Papua New Guinea, was called to the village of Perosa to see a woman who could not stop laughing. She was shaking her gait ataxic, her speech slurred, her eyes dancing with nystagmus. Within 6 months, she was dead. In the next year, 200 more died the same way, almost all women and children. The Four called it Kuru the Trembling. The core evidence of ritual mortuary cannibalism as a disease vector is the most complete and most terrifying in anthropology. In 1961, Michael Alpers of the University of Melbourne and Carlton Gajasek, later of the National Institutes of Health, arrived in the Four territory. Gajasek performed autopsies in the field, removing brains with a kitchen knife and carrying them in his own luggage to Bethesda. Electron microscopy showed spongiform vacuoles, holes in the brain, identical to scrapie in sheep. Gajasek won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1976 for proving that an infectious agent smaller than any virus could transmit. It was later named a prion by Stanley Prusiner of the University of California, San Francisco, who won the Nobel in 1997. Shirley Lindenbaum, anthropologist at the City University of New York, publishing in 1979 and in the journal Science in 1982, documented the cause when a four died. His or her female relatives would dismember the body, cook it in bamboo tubes, and consume everything except the gallbladder. The brain, which contains approximately 10 to the 9th infectious units per gram in a symptomatic individual, was reserved for children and elderly women. The men ate muscle and claimed to avoid brain because it made them weak. The transmission chain was perfect. 4 women had a mortality from Kuru of 200 per 1,000 per year in the late 1950s, 8 times the male rate. Children who ate brain died before puberty. Genetic work by Simon Mead of University College London, published in Nature in 2003, and in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2009 showed that survivors carry a heterozygous polymorphism at codon 129 of the PRNP gene G127V that confers complete resistance to prion disease, a selection pressure so intense it emerged within a single generation. The epidemic killed an estimated 2,700 people from 1957 to 2005 when the last patient died. The scale reveal is molecular and eternal. A prion is not alive, not reduced, not partially dried. It is a misfolded protein, 33 kilodaltons, that cannot be destroyed by boiling by formaldehyde, by radiation, by autoclaving at 134 degrees Celsius. It survives in soil for years. A single gram of infected brain contains enough prions to infect 1 million mice. The 4 were eating multiple grams per funeral. If the ritual continued unchecked, every susceptible individual in the population would have been infected within 1 generation, enough to empty every village in the highlands. But here's where the discovery becomes genuinely disturbing. The 4 knew exactly what they were doing and why. They did not eat their dead out of hunger. They ate them out of love and obligation. To not consume the ancestor was to abandon them to worms. The women told Lindenbaum they ate because they missed the person and wanted them inside them. It was grief made literal. They knew it caused death. They continued for years after Australian patrol officers banned it, hiding the consumption because the social cost of not eating was greater than the biological cost of dying. What makes this particularly unsettling is that this ritual is not ancient. It ended in living memory, and its biology connects directly to our deepest past. At Goff's Cave, the skull cups dated to 14700 years ago show cut marks identical to the 4 butchery patterns. At Krapina, 130,000-year-old Neanderthal skulls showed defleshing and marrow extraction, consistent with consumption. At Herxheim, 7,000-year-old skulls were processed and eaten. Genetic evidence published in Science in 2015 by Svante Paabo of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology suggests that the global distribution of PRNP resistance alleles indicates that prion disease from cannibalism shaped human evolution for hundreds of thousands of years. We may all carry the scar of an ancestral funeral feast in our genome. If we recreated the 4 right today, we would not be recreating a quaint custom. We would be manufacturing an incurable, transmissible, neurodegenerative disease that has an incubation period of up to 50 years, that cannot be sterilized, that cannot be vaccinated against, and that would persist in the laboratory, in the soil, on the instruments forever. The last Kuru patient died in 2005, but the prions remain in the ground at Okapa. That is why scientists fear this ritual above all others. Not because it is gruesome, because it still works. You exist because somewhere in your lineage, someone refused to eat the brain, or someone ate it and survived because of a single misspelling in a protein. The margin was almost nothing. The women of Pierosa, who laughed until they could not stand, were honoring their dead the way their mothers had taught them in a valley that had never seen a wheel, and their brains filled with holes, while their sisters watched and learned to carry a gene that will never leave our species. Whatever they understood about love and death that made the risk seem necessary remains locked in a language that has almost no speakers left and in soil that no one dares to dig again. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.